Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here with all of you to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this wonderful breakthrough organization. I'm grateful for the invitation. So I'd like to talk to you today about this question of flourishing, youth flourishing, and how it is that we can help create environments in which young people can achieve their potential, gain a sense of purpose, and have fulfilling lives. This is an outline of the 3 points that I want to make. So I'm going to go through these 3 points in order. The first one about a false opposition. Second one about what we call at Boston College formative education. And then the third, examples of how we do formative education at our institution. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you 2 visions of what it means to develop. We're all concerned with youth development and how it is that youth develop. And I want to give you a sense of 2 classic views of what development means. It's not clear that everyone agrees on what it is, so I want to try to give you some background. Whoops. So, this picture is meant to represent a view of development in which the young person, symbolized here by these plants, these shrubs, is trained in order to fit into the whole. So the notion is that whoever designed this garden wanted a beautiful representation, and in order for that to happen, certain plants had to be cut in various ways. So by analogy, individuals in a social group need to conform or play their appropriate roles in order to allow the whole to function the way the whole needs to function. So this is a vision of development that says development is about socialization. It's about being trained in order to take your place so that the whole can function in the way that the whole is meant to function. So we shape individuals in order to fit into society. This is a very common vision. Many sorts of organizations operate this way. You can imagine a family, for example, in which young people need to speak when spoken to do what they're told, to not cause trouble. This is another vision of human development. In this vision, individuals have something within them. It could be that they're born with it, it could be that it's natural or innate, or it could be that it comes from who they are, the inspiration that they feel, whatever it is that's inside them wanting to get out. And in this vision, like with this tree is going wherever it wants to go, right? This tree is growing in many different directions because that's what the tree is meant to do. It was meant to grow this way. It has the space and the opportunity in order to spread out and turn into whatever shape it is that is within inside wanting to get out, that this individual wants or needs to try to actualize. So this is a very different vision of what development is about. The individual is not shaped to participate in a whole. The individual is allowed to pursue whatever directions that individual feels or was meant to pursue as an individual. So, 2 visions of what development is like. On the right, we have this vision of individuals being trained in order to fit a particular shape. You probably know bushes do not grow naturally in those shapes on the right, so the individual has to be trained to do that. Doesn't matter if that bush wants to grow that way. You all have plants, right? Sometimes a plant just wants to grow in one direction. It just starts growing that way, and it's very hard to control it. Bushes were not meant to grow as they are here on the right. Somebody forced them to grow that way. It pruned them and cut them and fed them and positioned them such that they came out the way the whole wanted them or needed them to be. On the left, that tree just got going and it did whatever it wanted to do, and it may not be beautiful, it may not look wonderful next to other plants, but it's actualizing whatever's coming from the inside, whatever situation that it needs to do. So this is a very classic opposition as we think about human development. Is human development a process of being shaped to fit what some collective needs, or is it the opportunity to do what you would like to do? You could think of this as a choice between freedom and community, that either we're free to pursue our own desires, whatever we feel like we're good at, whatever we need to do, Or we can fit into a community, and it feels like you have to choose. If you have a relationship, then in that relationship, if you're not willing to accommodate, if you're not willing to compromise, the relationship can't last, right? Because if you do whatever you want, then the other person in the relationship eventually is going to get sick of you doing whatever you want. So it feels as if you have to lean toward either allowing individuals to do what they would like, or having individuals conform to what is expected of them. It's the same in a family. We have a family. Does everyone have to cooperate in order to get along so that nobody plays their loud music at all hours of the day and night just because they feel like it? There has to be some accommodation to the whole, but that means I don't get to listen to the music I want to listen to, so I have to give up some of my own desires in order to be able to fit into this collective. So it feels as if this is an either-or choice. Either we embrace development as the vision of we get to do whatever we want, or we allow that development requires compromises on the part of the individual to fit into whatever it is that the collective needs. This sort of either-or choice, in my society in the United States, we face this dilemma pretty acutely because we're a society that very much leans toward the freedom side. We very much lean toward that side, the left side of this diagram, where we feel like we should be able to do whatever we want. And when we travel around the world to other places, we find people reacting to us like, you can't do that, you know? And from my perspective, of course I can do that. I had an experience, I lived in Germany for a while, and they had little signs on the public parks, and they said, nicht betreten, which means don't walk here, don't go here. And as an American, if the shortest route was from here to there, across that space, I just started walking, and the Germans would yell at me. There would be Germans saying, hey, American, you know, stop that. So we tend toward one direction. Different societies have different emphases. But you get my point. It feels like a choice. It feels like we have to choose either more free, individualistic, or more collective or constrained. You see it in schooling, for example. We have to decide, do we let the individual child choose what he or she wants to study? In American universities, we talk about this in terms of core and electives. My university has a very extensive core requirement. You have to take 15 courses that are required by the institution, 2 philosophy, 2 theology, literature, history, and so forth. And that's very constraining, right? That we force those children, those students, to take certain kinds of things because we think it's important. There are other American universities, Brown famously, that has no requirements at all, no core at all. You can take anything you want. Everything is an elective. So it's a choice, right? Either you have core or you have electives, or you can have some mixture of both, but you can't do both at the same time. This is a quote from John Dewey, where he basically said, and this is the culmination of the first part of my presentation, he's basically saying, you don't have to make that choice. It feels like you have to choose between freedom, individuality, and community, the common good. But you actually don't have to choose. And this is a quote from him. He says that fostering development is the cultivation of the power to join freely and fully in shared or common activities. So it sounds like an oxymoron or a contradiction. I freely choose to do what the collective needs me to do. He's saying that in the right circumstances, individuals will want to, they will choose by nature, they will want to do what the whole needs them to do. It sounds like the best of all possible worlds, right? So what does he mean by that? He means that this opposition between freedom, doing what I want, and community, doing what the collective needs, he thinks that both of those positions make a mistake. They both assume that humans, if you leave them to their own devices, are going to want to do antisocial things, selfish things. They assume that humans are basically selfish, that if we don't constrain them, they will pursue things that will be at the expense of other people. And Dewey thinks that's wrong. Dewey thinks that actually humans are by nature social. He thinks that we depend essentially on others, and because we depend essentially on others, if we set up the environment properly, I will want to choose things that will be connected to others and good for others. So he thinks it's a matter of setting up an environment where we take advantage of the fact that I am naturally prone to want to do things that connect me to other people. If I think that humans are naturally prone to be selfish and just want stuff for themselves, this doesn't work, right? If humans want to do things that are only good for them, then we have to choose between freedom and community. But if humans naturally want to do things that connect them to others in common activities toward common ends, then we don't have to choose, then we get both at the same time. So that's the goal in a Deweyan perspective on thinking about development. In the right context, we can have development such that individuals will freely choose to participate with others in things that work toward the common good. So it's not a matter of, do I let the individual do what he wants or do I force him to do something else? It's how do I build an environment in which we get both of those things at the same time? You get the best of both worlds, as it were. So that, I think, is a challenge for us as educators or people who create environments that foster development. Can you create an environment in which people will freely choose, they will feel personally fulfilled doing something that will connect them to other people in a fundamental way? You can do that sometimes, you can not do it other times. How do we build an environment that's the right kind of environment to make that more likely as opposed to less likely? So, for the rest of the presentation, I want to talk a little bit about how could schools do this? How could you create an environment in schools where we would facilitate both individual flourishing, both a sense of fulfillment for individuals, but also contribution to some collective in a productive way? So you all know that we have around the world a sense of malaise among young people, that suicide rates have been increasing, there's students burning out, and this is not just a phenomenon of students who are in economically or socially challenged circumstances. In the United States, the rates of burnout and suicide and things are not highly concentrated among poor children or minoritized children. Actually, they spread across children even from very privileged backgrounds. So that phenomenon is a more global phenomenon, and this sense of disengagement has concerned people. People are worrying about how is it that we can do something to help young people as they experience this sense of struggle. Schools didn't cause this problem. The cause of the sense of alienation among young people is not just schooling. It's not all schools' fault, although a sense of an overemphasis on academic achievement contributes to the problem, but it is not the only cause and perhaps not the most important cause. However, since young people spend a lot of time in school, you would think that school could help with this problem. Young people are feeling alienated, young people are feeling disconnected. Since they're in school a lot, maybe a school could be a good place to help engage this and overcome this sense of alienation for them. However, schools are not in a good position to do this for historical reasons. Schools, because young people spend so much time there, could have helped us engage students' sense of feelings of alienation, lack of a sense of purpose, sense of burnout. Schools could have helped with that, but they have not been able to because of the particular historical moment that we have found ourselves in with respect to schooling. Schools spent a lot of time focused on academic standards. So in the United States, we had something we called the standards movement that reached its peak about 20 years ago, and it involved a myopic focus, a focus just on academic success, just on content knowledge and skills. So we decided schooling was basically about young people getting a bunch of knowledge, developing a bunch of skills so they could contribute to the economy and be successful adults. Now, we all agree, I'm sure, that it's good for students to learn things. Subject matter knowledge is crucial. And it's also good for students to develop skills so they can get jobs. Nobody is opposed to that. However, schools became so focused on narrow academic ends and narrow instrumental ends that they lost an opportunity to engage with young people as whole human beings. So all of a sudden, we started thinking of them as just test scores, as just little repositories of academic knowledge, and that's not enough in order to try to engage with the bigger issue. So the problem was Students were feeling alienated. They were feeling as if they lacked a sense of purpose. They were feeling burned out. And school, the message from school was, study harder and do better on the test. Nothing wrong with studying hard, nothing wrong with doing well on a test, but if that's the only thing the school is about, of course it can't be a place that helps with these problems of alienation and burnout. So schools were in a bad position 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and this is, again, a global problem. People were seeing this in many different societies around the world. So what happened is we had this notion of whole person education develop. People started to say, hey, maybe we should start thinking about schooling as something that doesn't just foster intellectual development. It's not just about subject matter knowledge. It's also about developing kids in other ways, about emotional challenges, about social and relational development, about ethical development, character, a sense of purpose. These are just some of the terms that have been used to describe these different movements that have been surging over the last decade or two. Some of these have been around forever. Character education, civic education are thousands of years old. So in Greek-based traditions, in ancient Greek traditions, you have a lot of talk about character. In Confucian traditions, you have a lot of talk about character or equivalent terms, about civic participation in civic life. So these are not new traditions. Some of the other ones are new traditions. Social and emotional learning is a term that has been particularly important in the United States over the last couple of decades. But whatever you call it, well-being, character education, flourishing, these are things that school systems around the world have gotten concerned about, and some have made substantial progress over the last decade or so. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the work in Singapore around well-being. And so that work has moved forward in a lot of places at different paces, but it's a response to the same problem. It's a response to the alienation among young people and the failure of schools to engage with that problem because of the school's emphasis on academic success. So what I want to try to do for you now is give you a sense of what we mean by formative education at Boston College, which is our version of this holistic approach to education, and give you a couple of examples of what we do and how it works. So formative education comes out of the particular tradition at BC, and it has these 4 characteristics. The first we've already discussed. It is both social and individual. Formative education is about the development of individuals in social contexts such that the individuals can flourish in ways that contribute to the whole. So it's not either individualistic or social. Some approaches to whole person education are one or the other. So a lot of the work in social and emotional learning in the United States is individualistic. You train individuals to manage their emotions, to manage their relationships. It's not really concerned with collectives. Civic education, for example, is focused on the collective. How do we create a particular kind of social system where everybody contributes in their role? Our education is meant to be our formative education, both social and individual. It's holistic. We're concerned with young people intellectually, emotionally, relationally, ethically, spiritually. We're concerned with young people across all those dimensions. A young person sitting in a literature classroom is engaging with all of these things at once. If you read great literature, it evokes emotions. If you read great literature, you disagree with people who have other perspectives of it, who are sitting in the room with you. It creates ethical challenges. What would you do if you were in that situation and faced that choice? It raises spiritual questions about what's your larger purpose in life. So reading literature in a literature classroom engages all those aspects of a young person. And what our schools have done in recent years is to ignore everything except the intellectual. So the test is going to be about the themes and the representations and the images and the language in the book, and it's going to ignore the fact that this young person is having emotional reactions to that text and is facing ethical conundrums that are the same as the ones that the characters are facing, and is facing spiritual puzzles, just like people in the text. The young person in the classroom, it's as if we cut part of them off and push it to the side and say, that's not our business. In school, we don't talk about ethics. That's dangerous. We don't talk about spirituality. That's dangerous. We just focus on intellectual development and leave the rest of yourself at the door. which is unrealistic because the person is a whole person sitting in front of you in that classroom. So we need to develop whole people as opposed to focusing just on slices of people. The third characteristic on the slide has to do with instrumental versus intrinsic motivation. That as humans, we all do things for instrumental reasons. We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to have enough resources to support ourselves and our families. There's nothing wrong with doing something for the sake of reaching an end, for the sake of reaching a goal, like earning money or gaining status. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when that's the only thing you do. If your entire life is about earning money or gaining status or how other people think of you, that's sort of an extrinsic goal, a goal that is connected to something that doesn't motivate you personally, but is just an end that you're scrambling for. You can't sustain a fulfilling life across a lifetime if you are only concerned about making more money or raising your own status. It's not enough. There's nothing wrong with it. It's only bad if it's the only thing that you do. And so we're concerned with intrinsic motivation. What is it that young people feel intrinsically connected to and motivated by? And that's something that you also want to foster in development. And then a larger sense of purpose is also crucial. That young people yearn to have something that they feel connected to. They yearn to have some sense of why they're here and what they can contribute. And at my university, we don't think we get to tell people what their purpose is. Different people have different senses of what their purpose is, because your sense of purpose depends on a vision of what the moral universe is like. Why are humans here? What ought we to do? What do we owe other people? There are many answers to those questions. I don't have a right to tell a young person in a classroom, you have to believe this, you have to believe in this kind of God, or you have to believe in that kind of social system. I don't have a right to do that. But I do have a right, I have an obligation to force that young person to ask that question. So the young person has to think about, what is ultimately important to me? What kind of society ought I to live in? What sort of gods are there? What do I owe to other people? You need to have young people asking those questions. So I don't get to tell them the answers, but I can force them to ask the questions because they need a sense of what their larger purpose is. And with that sense of purpose, if they can figure out, if they can discern what that purpose is for themselves, then we can have a hope that they can lead a life that is fulfilling because it's aimed toward something that they have embraced intrinsically, that they feel connected to. So that sense of purpose is crucial for us. Quickly, I want to give you a couple of examples of how we do this, what it is we think is important here. The first one has to do with retreats. So the retreats that we run at our university, we really like retreats. We send students away all the time. That we have a saying that says, the uninterrupted life is not worth living. So the uninterrupted life is not worth living, which means you have to stop your life sometimes and go somewhere else, because when you interrupt yourself, you push away everyday concerns. You have a chance to think about things that are different. So we take young students, young children away. These are 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and we ask them these 3 questions. This is one example of one kind of thing that we do. What are you good at? What brings you joy? And what does the world need you to do? So the idea is, I'm a young person. I'm trying to figure out, what do I want to do with my life? How do I answer that question? Our suggestion is, well, first, what are you good at? What kinds of things do you have talents in? Second, what brings you joy? What actually do you feel motivated by? What is it that gives you a sense of fulfillment? And third, what does the world need? If you can find something, a pathway in life, where all 3 of those questions intersect, you've probably found something that's worth pursuing, that will give you some sense of fulfillment over time. If you can only get 1 or 2 of them, it's harder to get a sense of fulfillment over time. So these retreats I'm talking about, you spend 48 hours, you go away to a property that the university owns, you stay overnight, you spend half a day on each of these questions. You talk with your you talk with other students, you get presentations from older people who talk about their own experiences, you get an opportunity to write in journals, to reflect, perhaps to meditate, and you work on each of these 3 questions, and then you come back at the end and try to see what might be a direction that you would want to go. So that's a retreat that gets you out of everyday life and gets you thinking about bigger issues to try to develop some sense of purpose. A second example. So we have many service learning programs that have a particular academic character. A lot of American universities will send young people out into the world to serve with, to accompany people in a soup kitchen, a shelter for homeless people, or some other organization like that. What's different about the way that we do service learning is that it's part of our academic coursework. So I'm teaching you a course in philosophy, and we're reading philosophy about ethics. We're reading Aristotle about ethics. We're reading Kant about ethics. And while we are reading that academic subject matter and discussing it, I spend, as a student, 8 hours a week out in the community in Boston working, volunteering at some organization. And I'm at that organization doing my volunteer work as part of my class. It's not separate, it's not extracurricular, it is a requirement for the class. And then I come back in at the end of the week and we have a conversation and we're talking about Aristotle. And our conversation about Aristotle isn't just about Aristotle, it's also about what did I experience when I was out in this homeless shelter this week, and how does that connect to what Aristotle was saying when he was talking about character and virtues and the other things that are in the reading. So it's an attempt to connect the experience in the world with the experience in the classroom in a deeper way. A second example has to do with pilgrimages. So we actually have a course on pilgrimages where they walk the Camino in Spain. So this is a particular pilgrimage that people will go on, and they'll spend weeks sometimes walking down the road from one point to another on this pilgrimage. And it has religious significance, but the idea is they're taking a course on pilgrimages. They're literally reading about what is a pilgrimage, why do people do it, what are the different pilgrimage sites, different religions and different cultures around the world. And then in the middle of that course, they'll physically go to Spain and they'll spend 2 weeks walking. The professor too, so you have the professor plus the students walking the Camino, and there are all sorts of pilgrims on this road, and there are shrines, and so they will participate in these activities. But then they go back to the university and they continue their reading and writing with this experience in common. So it's an attempt to connect the actual experiences with the subject matter, with the academic content of the course. Okay, one more example. City Connects is an in-school activity. It's an in-school program that we have built in order to try to provide whole student integrated support. So it's an attempt to work with students in underprivileged schools who need support of various kinds. And I'll try to give you a quick sense of how it works. So the idea is, what we're going to do with young people in one of these schools is we're going to try to respond to them as whole human beings. We're going to recognize that they have multiple kinds of strengths and multiple kinds of needs, and we're going to try to figure out for each individual what the need is, and we're going to try to meet it. So it's integrated student support, support for a whole person. And this is a video. If you guys could play the video, we could get a sense of it.
City Connects is an evidence-based and a school-based approach to addressing the out-of-school needs of low-income children, challenges that significantly impede their ability to learn and thrive. We do that by identifying the strengths and needs of a particular child, one child at a time, and every child, and then accessing the resources in the community to complement the needs and strengths of the child.
In order for kids to be successful in school, they need lots of different things. A kid might need a backpack, a winter coat. She might need counseling, a family service center. And those are all of the kinds of things that your City Connects coordinator can connect you to.
One advantage of City Connects is that it takes a multi-pronged approach to solving a multi-pronged problem. The disadvantage and also the advantages that we see among families in poverty are not the same from family to family and child to child. So if children are coming through the door and they have many cognitive and learning strengths, they can maximize those cognitive strengths.
We've got kids who are coming in with significant amounts of trauma or significant amounts of food insecurity or housing insecurity, and those things can play out in a kid's school day. What they come into the building with is what their teachers are going to address, what I'm going to address, what the principal is going to address. We have people who are tied to this neighborhood, both who are the families and who are the teachers, and it really is a community school.
It's not just academic success. They provide different supports And a lot of times if you hear stories, sometimes
Back in the late 90s, we did it by relying on developmental science, and we worked very closely with practitioners in the community. We were able, in a sense, to create a system that built the proverbial village around the child.
From the outset, City Connects was very concerned with collecting data to be able to evaluate the impact of the
City Connects, the examples you saw there were largely elementary schools, but the model can also work with adolescents. It can work at the high school level as well. So the way it works is, for every single child in that school, there is a meeting at the beginning of the year to figure out what is going on with this child. So the teacher, the City Connects coordinator, who is a full-time staff member who staffs the project, they get together at the beginning of the year. They meet with prior teachers, they have guidance counselors and others who know this child, and they try to figure out what is it that this particular child needs in order to thrive. And as they said in the video, that could range. Some kids come from family homes where there's violence or trauma. Some kids need glasses because nobody's figured out that they can't see clearly. Some kids need dental care. Their teeth are killing them because they can't think in school just because of the dental problems. And so whatever it is that that particular child needs, this team figures out, we're going to try to support that. And then the City Connects program partners with organizations. In the US, as I imagine here as well, there are many organizations in any community that provide these sorts of services, that poor people can get free dental care, for example. And so what City Connects does is it develops a whole list of all the organizations in this community that can provide things. That child might need counseling, or winter clothes, or glasses, or dental care, or various sorts of services, and when they figure out that this child has this need, they match that community organization with that child or that family, and then the result is support for that particular need for that child. So they're trying to tailor what they're doing to the needs of the individual, and this is a relatively inexpensive program because the services are already there. All they're doing is matching what it is that this child needs with the service that's existing. The only extra expense is there is a coordinator, so each school has to hire one full-time person to do the work of managing this process. And so they have the meeting every year, the student review, they work with the families and the partners, and then they collect data. They have a proprietary data system where they collect data on each individual kid each year. And over time, it turns out to be quite successful. In terms of what it does, there's lots of data about how it improves academic outcomes, so kids manage to catch up with kids from more privileged backgrounds pretty quickly through the City Connects intervention. So, those are meant to be a few examples of the kind of work we do in more holistic or formative education for young people. We talked about pilgrimages, we talked about retreats, we talked about service learning, we talked about the City Connects intervention in schools. So these are just a few things that we do to try to actualize, to enact our vision of formative education. So this is just the summary. Globally, people are concerned about this overly narrow vision of education as being just academic. We need to envision students as whole people who need to develop academically, but also need to develop emotionally, relationally, ethically, and spiritually. This sense of formation, of trying to support people as whole human beings, is crucial, and I put it up there as expanding our educational aspirations. We need to aspire to do better, to build developmental contexts in which young people can be their whole selves, in which we can foster the development of whole people. And we need to try to do that in a systemic way that will allow them to flourish as individuals, but also contribute to larger communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please be seated.